the Northwest home for paranormal. You're listening to U.S. Phenomenon with your host, Mario Magana.
The 1962 World's Fair, the Space Needle. Good evening. I'm your host, Mario Magana. This is U.S. Phenomenon. You can be a part of the show by texting our studio hotline, 775-990-5151. Tonight, we talk about the legend and conspiracy theory, probably one of the biggest ones of the 20th century, alleging that Paul McCartney from the Beatles died November 9th, 1966. Tonight, Michael Parker, host of The Program, joins us to discuss Is Paul McCartney Dead conspiracy. It's my pleasure to welcome back to the show, Michael Parker. Welcome back, my friend.
Mario, thank you so much. I love conspiracies. I love rock and roll, love the Beatles, Paul McCartney, so this will be fun.
You know, I almost called you Paul by accident, but again, welcome back. You know what's interesting? That when we talk about this conspiracy, this was ranked as one of in the top 10. Where would you consider this to be in the top 10 in the last 20 years?
Okay, so if so let's go.
How about I give you this?
Okay,
it was number 4 on the top 10 list. Which one is number 1 or number 2?
Number 1 and number 2 would have to be Apollo moon landing. I'm going to say number 1 not happening. Number 2, 9/11. That's going to be my guess.
Wow, number 2, you did get right. 9/11 was the cover up for number 2, and number 1 is the JFK assassination. So two things that happened in the 20th century, and number 3 was to round that up was Area 51 and aliens.
Well, wait a minute. Where's the moon landing? Because that's got to be in the top 5. Come on.
Oh, let me pull that up real quick. I do have.
We got to know. We got to know.
The moon landing was number 4 or 5 and number 6.
Okay. All right. Well, top 10.
Yeah, and Jesus and Mary Magdalene was also a part of the top 10 as well. So that's an interesting.
This came from Time Magazine.
Yes, this came from Time Magazine. Okay. This was, and we'll have a link on the website. Okay. It doesn't say the date though. I was just looking for the date here. This has got to be from some time ago because down below you got Sarah Palin and her husband there holding a granddaughter, I believe. So this got to be from some time ago.
Mm-hmm.
You know what's interesting about that when we talk about this? Now I know of all things, was this? I know there's like so many different angles with this conspiracy. Was this to sell records? I mean, I know the Beatles were close to the end there. Was this more of a ploy, do you think, to sell more records back in those days? Just maybe there was a slump. I mean, do we know? What's your thoughts on that piece?
Okay, so this is the 60s, and what we think of in pop culture now, the minute someone dies, that translates to, if they're a music person, everybody downloads their tracks. If it's a movie star, then people will watch the movies. But in the late 60s, even though I don't think that this was as mainstream an idea that you could, sell a bunch of records, I think probably the business knew somewhat of that. But here's the thing. I think that the Beatles, first of all, they're like the biggest thing in the planet at that point, besides like the Vietnam War and things like that. The Beatles were a social phenomena outside of the way we view the world today. Because these days we've got iPhones and the internet and all that. Well, back then, all they had was television. You'd buy the record, you could buy a magazine, you could talk to your friends, in person or via letter or whatever. But anyway, point being is the Beatles were the biggest thing in the world. And there was just nothing really that compared with them. They were bigger than Elvis at that point. And they were everybody's fascination. I think they were also very clever guys and mischievous a little bit, especially John Lennon. I think that when they found out this was happening, I think they might have intentionally at first kind of like egged it along because they're young guys that are really smart and really fun. I don't, and then probably it got out of control because then you've got the whole world looking at it. It's almost like you crowdsourced something unintentionally, and then people start looking at it and adding their own ideas. So, I don't think Paul McCartney died in a car crash, but B, I think that initially they probably wanted to have a little fun with it, and then it got out of control.
I mean, there are so many things with, I mean, when you go back and you listen, I know I sent you last night.
Yes, I listened to that.
I mean, it was 11 minutes of like anguish for me. I'm like, I don't know that at the end of like some guy made a whole song about the situation.
Yes.
And got the rights and everything. We'll have that link as well posted up. And I believe the gentleman's name, I can't even think it off. It was
Perry something. And he had supposedly gone to have a visit with Paul McCartney, and as perhaps being signed to the Apple label, which was the newly formed Beatles label. I can't remember this guy's last name, but anyway, he doesn't get signed. But after that, he comes back to Chicago or wherever the heck he's living, Detroit or whatever it is, and then makes this song that has all of these kind of Beatle song bits in it. And then he kind of tells this story that you could kind of allude to being, Paul, you put us all on, or like a trick. But yeah.
And for me, looking at Abbey Road, and we'll get into that, and listening to the White Album where it says number nine, there's so much. I don't know what was interesting about the Beatles and how they would do their music is if you were listening to like Abbey Road, the songs would blend in together. They would like back in the day, the song would end, or nowadays, or just in general, most songs will have an ending. And then, the new song starts. It's like I could be driving down the road back in the day as a kid, and I remember this distinctly, was listening to these songs, and then they would just transition to the next song.
Yeah.
Especially
just how Abbey Road. And, yeah.
Day in the Life was one of those examples as well, and Sgt. Pepper Lonely Hearts. I mean, there's so many different clues in all these different albums, or at least these two albums here. And White Album. I mean, there's these clues that are like, is this to sell records? I'm like, maybe it's a great ploy. I mean, if Paul McCartney was really dead, and the tongue in cheek where he's like, well, I could be the other guy, it's like, okay. So what we'll do is, I know that we have, and for those who aren't listening, and if you're listening to the radio, or streaming the podcast, you can watch this show. It is available on onairmario.com. We're going to get into the piece where we talk about the different conspiracies, like, as we all know, the famous Abbey Road piece where the album cover, the art, where they have, where did it go? Oh, here it is. There we go. As we can see here, in the album art, you have, John Lennon, who's wearing the white suit, and he's supposed to be the priest, right? Is that how that played out?
Yeah, and he kind of looks like Jesus, with the hair and everything, and he is dressed in white, like we would think like angelic or something.
Very much. And then you had the mortician as the mortician, right? That's what they?
Yes.
And then what's interesting about that is, of all things, because you have George in the back who looks like a bum, who's not actually a bum. He looks like a grave digger. And we're not talking about the monster truck. We're talking about someone who's out there digging, digging. But what's interesting to me, and what makes this whole conspiracy so interesting to me, because the stories that go back in those days shared that Paul was wearing sandals. Now, allegedly, he took them off because it was so hot that day. Now, he's barefooted, this to indicate that he was dead. And that the cigarette in the right hand was actually the indication of the nail in the coffin with the cigarette. Now,
well, and also Paul McCartney was a left-handed person. He was the only person in the Beatles that was left-handed.
Well, I'm left-handed too, but I'm definitely, that makes us, me and Paul, we're like one, we're interesting individuals. But if they were close to the end, well, in 66, I mean, the band didn't break up till 69, right? So there was some time for, for this to happen. What's interesting about that piece that we listened to last night, and we'll link it up so you can listen to the song on the podcast. That song last night was interesting because that's how the rumor all started here in the US. Was this guy wrote this song, they went back to publishing to get it all cleared so that if the song blew up and became like number one, they weren't going to get, sued by Apple Records. Now, if Paul McCartney had passed away, if that's what the alleged story is, now the other piece in the background talks about the Volkswagen Bug in the background. Now, it's what the license plate either says, like, I think it was like would have been 28 or something like that, and or it was like I need to zoom in here, but I believe it was
LMV.
Yeah.
In this particular photo, I can't see it that well, but
yeah. So everyone who's listening to the show is like, you guys are dummies. It's like, it'll all be posted, but he would have been 28, right? He would have been 28.
See, here's the deal is if you're the most famous band in the world, if you are one of the biggest social phenomena in the world, everyone's obsessed with you, all ages, youth, adults. I mean, in my opinion, there's never been another Beatles. There's never been acts of that size, because these days, yes, Taylor Swift will sell out, 10 nights at the Madison Square Garden or something, but it's a different thing. There's many, many artists out in the world. Now, she's at the top probably, and I'm just saying this as far as amount of fans, but what I'm saying is she doesn't carry the weight in this world as a just cultural obsession the way that the Beatles did at that time. So when the Beatles would make an album cover, and everybody's staring at, oh, look at the license plate on the VW Bug. Oh my God, Paul's barefooted. It's just everybody then contributes their own interpretation into what they're seeing, like pareidolia. When you see a face in the clouds or something.
And the license plate was LMW281F. Okay. It would have been 28 if, as we will, some people think it's Linda McCartney mourns or, was mourning the death of Paul. Just an interesting cover album. And looking at this whole piece and how this all transpired and how all these individuals, I can't even imagine if something like this was to happen. It would be at the levels of like the recent one of the drummer from the Foo Fighters passing away. It would have been a devastating moment for a tragic moment in the Beatles' history. Yeah. Not all, losing the number one or number two, because I'll be honest with you, I think Paul is a much better writer than John. That's my personal opinion.
Paul was fantastic. Paul was amazing.
I don't think that Lennon was that great. If you listen to us, this is someone who grew up listening to this stuff on a regular day-to-day. Now, as an adult, my ears were bleeding Beatles. I could tell you that my dad had me listening to the Lost Lennon tapes back in the day. It was Breakfast with the Beatles. It was, you name it, it was Beatles back in the early 80s when you didn't have, you just
Spotify.
Or not only that, but whatever your parents said, and was like, I had cassette tapes for days. Well, what's interesting is, people are going to, agree to disagree about who was the better Beatle, but this piece is crazy to me because all the different things that the Beatles did as a band. The hidden messages, like you're listening to an album and then way down in the end of the record, you got some like random, hidden message. It's like,
Well,
I go ahead.
Well, Mario, I just want to say another thing, and it's like, look, it's not a secret. So, but look, I mean, also, not only were the Beatles really clever, they're young, they're on top of the world, they're also taking psychedelics. So they're having ideas and they're having fun with the creative process. And I don't think it would be too much to think that they also know, look, we have a mystique, and they were probably, I can imagine John Lennon and Paul at just having fun with it. Let's put this over here and people are going to think it's this, that, or the other thing. I don't think that they were probably totally innocent in all this. I think they were young guys on top of the world having a little bit of fun.
Good point. Who was your favorite Beatle, or who is your favorite Beatle?
Well, when I was a kid, it was Paul McCartney, and then I went through a gigantic John Lennon obsession in my adulthood. But I love them all. Right now, I've got a bunch of Beatles records down on the floor over here. Oh, actually, more solo albums. I've been rebuilding my vinyl collection, and I have probably 8 or 10 George Harrison albums right to my immediate left. But I love classic rock, and I love that period of music, and I love what it was. I mean, because bands like the Beatles and the Stones, Jimi Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, they were all inventing, essentially, Pink Floyd, they were inventing classic rock. It was the Wild West, and they invented what would become, a genre of music that's been immensely popular.
And when we talk about that, and we'll get into the second half, kind of dissecting the reverse pieces here, but going back, I think there may have been a time in my life where I was just like, F it, I'm done. I can't take another Beatles song. But as I've gotten older and have continued to now, I would say, appreciate one of the best bands of all time. I mean, you're right about cutting edge, the stereo, how they were doing the tracks back in the day. For those who are like, if you're listening in headphones, and how the songs would pan and do these psychedelic. It was like if you were listening to the Beatles, and if you were on something, you're definitely getting an experience. It's definitely an experience.
And Mario, they knew that, and that was reflected in their production techniques, in their artwork, and they were smart guys.
And when we talk about, as maybe one would say, do you think this was a cover up by any means? Maybe we should talk about it in the second half, but close to a cover up, a Beatles cover up, because look, this was like one of the biggest band, and they're a machine. We got to damage control. We lost our member. This happened. Okay, let's brush this to the side. Let's move forward. We'll talk about that. Plus, we'll also talk about Mark Christopher's Paranormal Story of the Week, which we continue on a music genre to the modern day. So maybe you're not a Beatles fan. Maybe you're a modern day Taylor Swift, someone of that nature, where you like music of the top 40 genre. Hey, man, the Beatles were top 40, but back in the day. Now, if you're someone of a younger generation, you're like, oh, I like Jay-Z. Mark Christopher's got some paranormal stuff that we're going to talk about. What's interesting, because I was thinking of other records, and maybe you can think of a couple off the top of your head, and most people won't understand this, but when you hear those different hidden messages that we will take a listen to, there were some of those that were even in like Tupac's Machiavelli album. You could hear faintly "Suge Shot Me," things of that nature. I can't think of any others off the top of my head, but that one sticks out to me because that was such again impactful. Someone who was on the top of his game, someone who was just cutting edge as a rap artist. Maybe not everyone's favorite rapper, but his lyrics, even to this day, are so profound. and it doesn't sound aged one bit. Him and Biggie. So, so when we come back, we're getting close to the bottom of the hour here, but when we come back, we'll continue talking about, we'll talk about the alleged Paul McCartney dying in a car crash, how that plays out. Plus, Michael Parker will give his analysis. Maybe there's a cover-up somehow. Maybe we'll break down some other angles of the story. Plus, if you want to give your take on it, let us know. We got the Paranormal Story of the Week. If you're not following us or subscribe to our podcast, you can do so by either going to you can go to onairmario.com or search on your favorite podcasting platform. Just search US Phenomenon. Make sure you like, subscribe, and leave us a comment in the comments section. We'd love to hear from you, and maybe we'll send you out a sticker if I call your name. All right, we'll be back. You're listening to US Phenomenon. All right, let me make sure we're still all good there. Ready?
Yes.
Three, two, one. Welcome back to US Phenomenon. Our guest tonight is no stranger to this show. He has been a huge contributor to US Phenomenon. He hosts his own show. It's daily. Is it?
Yeah.
How many hours
Monday
are you
through
guys
Friday.
doing? Yeah, you're doing. I love this. Now, our Beatles fans are already calling up. You're doing the show daily, and how many hours are you guys doing that thing for?
Well, my show is 2 hours a day. It started out 3 hours. I mean, it was like a lot of interviews. So I'm glad we pared it down to 2 hours, because I've probably done over 500 interviews since starting the job in April. It's crazy.
I mean, that's a lot of interviews. That's a lot of content.
Yeah.
I mean, we got to change your bio to no longer. You're not. You got like probably no more than thousands now. So you have your show, and again, I know I was like, I gotta get the rock legend, someone who has been a part of the industry. You've been a part of the music industry for such a long time. Boots on ground, from running nightclubs, things of that nature, being a part of, kind of like a historian, understanding the value of where we came from in the 60s to now. What's interesting about this being the number 4 top 10 conspiracies of all time, JFK being number 1,
9/11,
and then something about UFOs in the desert somewhere being the top 3, then this one being the number 4 conspiracy of all times. What's interesting to me about this is the story seemed to be pretty accurate across the board about Paul McCartney leaving the studio upset, getting in the vehicle, driving down the highway, or the whatever they call it, the beltway, crashing the vehicle. Then no one saw this except for whoever, cleans up, disposes, and they find this lookalike named Michael Parker, and then continues doing this shit.
Can you imagine? I mean, Mario, that's the part that.
Whoa.
Wow! Did you see that?
Yes. You're still alive. You're still here.
Yeah. So in my studio, all the lights just flash on and off, like God's talking to me or something. Oh, but here's what I wanted to say about this, because believe it or not, some people don't know that this conspiracy existed. And just like my 15-second elevator pitch is like, for the people that don't know, yes, people believe that at the height of their fame, Paul McCartney, bass player, one of the 2 lead singers for the band, died in a car crash in 1966. He was then secretly replaced, supposedly, by this double, because everybody said, oh, it's just going to be too much heartbreak. But my point is the point that you just made, because my wife said, I've never heard that before. I'm like, no, honey, a lot of people have believed this. But what I would say, from having played in bands and being a big Beatles fan, this time last year, we were getting ready to watch 9 hours of Beatles footage. That was the Get Back series, the documentary series, and it had the blessing of all 4 families of the Beatles. And you would think that if that recording was depicting a man who was a double, had replaced Paul McCartney, you wouldn't think they would put that out. And I just find the whole idea that you could find a person, give them a minute amount of plastic surgery in the 1960s, have them replace one of the most famous men in the world, but not only replace him, but now sing like him, talk like him, write like him, think like him. I just think that's a tall order. And then take it to the next level. My wife said, oh, yeah. And so Linda Eastman, who was of a very rich family, the Eastmans owned Kodak. She was very, very rich. So
Right.
you're telling me that after this happened in 66, she would go on and marry this guy in 69 when he's not the real Paul McCartney. I don't know. And then we do Wings. I mean, Paul McCartney is still touring and making music to this day. I'm just saying, even to play devil's advocate, let's say they replace Paul McCartney. Who wants to do that for the rest of their life, even if they had the ability, which I don't even know if that's even possible. It's just, I don't know, man. It doesn't really work for me.
And then the replacement wrote "Hey Jude."
Well, I mean, you've got to write all this great music. There's plenty of recordings of this person. Hey, but on the other hand, I will say this to those of you who may believe this. I'm not trying to disrespect you, because there's a lot of stuff in the world that we've been told is and is a lie. So I get it. I understand it. Just for me, and I'm only speaking for me, I think that Paul McCartney is very much alive. And he wrote all of that music, and it was really great.
Can we go back to the blessing of all the families? I mean,
Yeah.
Let's be honest. I've not said this, but of all the things that I've ever watched, and watching that documentary, I don't know how many other people, if you haven't seen it, you got to watch it.
Awesome.
How many other, I mean, I was pissed as a casual watcher. I'm like, yo, Yoko was like running the joint. Like, it was nuts to me. How
Really? You thought she was? I mean, I thought she was mostly quiet. She was over there knitting and stuff. And I thought that Paul McCartney was running the joint, because I was actually impressed because John, to me, I watched all 9 hours of it because I'm a nerd. But like, John, they were all kind of signed out to me. I mean, they've been doing this for, they were checked out. But Paul was like the boss. He was, and they even have this conversation where he's talking to John. You used to be the boss, but now I'm the boss. But it's because, somebody has to do this. And I actually thought that Yoko was pretty mellow in the whole thing and kind of meekly just sitting around.
Yeah. But when she did say, like, there were some times where I was like, wow, interesting. It was just interesting for me to watch. I'm like everyone says, who broke the band up? Yoko Ono did not break up the band.
No.
The band. I mean, Paul said in an interview with Howard Stern, John broke the band up. He said that was it. He was like, we're gonna have to break up, and that if it's coming from the man who is playing Paul McCartney these days, who we think is, will the real Paul McCartney please stand up?
Yeah.
And so you just got to go with it. And what's interesting to me is listening to him talk about it. We're talking one of the biggest bands. He toured, saw him at down here at the stadium, down at T-Mobile Park back in the day with the Foo Fighter, Nirvana showed up. Dave came out, Chris, Pat, they all came out. Awesome to see them all play together. Brought chills, to me. And but to see that Paul has that relationship with so many different individuals. I mean, let's talk about that. We're talking about other bands that may have had secret little messages or hidden different things in different album art and things of that nature. Now, what is interesting to me is we'll put this in later in the podcast. I'll be subscribed. You got to subscribe to the podcast if you want to hear the entire podcast. But what we'll do is we'll reverse my audio saying number 9, number 9, number 9. We'll play that back and see how that sounds and see if it sounds anything like what we're going to listen to right now. And what's interesting is we do have some of the audio. If you remember off the album, Here's the original, cleaned up nicely, by the way.
Number 9, number 9, number 9, number 9, number 9, number 9, number 9.
Now here it is in reversed. What's your thoughts on that, man? That's pretty clean audio. If you're listening in your car, got your headphones on. I mean, I'm hearing everything, but it clearly states, I hear "Turn Me On, Dead Man."
Yeah. It is really cool, actually. I mean, it's just one of those things that at that point back in the day, to get backwards sounds, I mean, you would flip the tape over. That's how Jimi Hendrix got a lot of his guitar sounds and things. But it's just, I just think they were really clever guys. And George Martin, their producer, was kind of a genius producer, because he had been doing all of this kind of theatrical recordings and stuff for the BBC. And then they give him this band to work with. So, I mean, the whole thing was just really smart young guys with unstoppable creativity. You've got a producer who's extremely smart. You have the first recording techniques literally being invented, multi-track units. And then you've got these very, very talented people doing it. So cool stuff happens. I mean, I don't know how it sounds like "Turn Me On, Dead Man," but that's exactly what it sounds like. And the fact that John's saying it in his deadpan John voice makes it really creepy and cool simultaneously.
I mean, when I heard that, I was like, wow, and the audio is so clean. Because I was searching around. I was like, you don't want to play garbage. I don't want to be like, look, we've had people come on the radio show that do this for a living, where they found hidden messages. And Brian, I forget the guy's name. He came on a while back, one of the most downloaded podcasts next to Mark Jacobson and his Pale Horse Rider podcast, or now it's a podcast. So of all time, which is interesting is because you hear that in the reverse. On the first one, I did not hear that. When
number 9, number 9, number 9, number 9.
You can hear the
number 9, number 9. Number 9.
You can hear the audio panning left to right, and so you do hear it in the reversed audio as well. And just so good on how they would play out on how this plays out. Well, one more time, just so we can all hear it. And there's so many. Yeah, and there's some other pieces that we have here, clues that I buried Paul, and I wanted to play that one for us as well, which is interesting. We'll take a listen to this one as well. See how this one plays out here.
All together now, 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 all together now. Black, white.
Now reversed.
Out. Behind the leg is law. 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 Behind the leg is law.
And you can hear right there him saying, "I buried Paul." Just interesting.
Yeah. And imagine the people that went through all of these things to figure all of these things out, because I mentioned earlier, the idea of pareidolia, and pareidolia is when we look at clouds or whatever, we find meaning in an abstract image. But there's also another term called apophenia, which I only learned today, but it was invented in 1958 by this German neurologist, Klaus Conrad, basically saying that people would try to make sense out of, they would try to make patterns out of just information. And so all of these people that were Beatles freaks, young and old, would be looking at, the record covers, the lyrics, the songs, everything. And then they would all project their own interpretations onto this. And then I share that with you, and then you share it with somebody else, and somebody documents all of this. But the whole world's doing it. So you eventually come up with a lot of data.
When you think about this, I mean, if I'm going to go with, I think they did this to sell records, man. I think this was a genius idea because look, this isn't just about Abbey Road. This goes on to a couple other albums. They're still talking about it in the hidden messages in Sgt. Pepper Lonely Hearts Club. There's the front cover, the patch. You got, and then if you turn the record over, it talks about the hands pointing to Paul's buried, things of that nature. So there's some other hidden messages in these albums.
So are you saying the Beatles did that intentionally, or Capital EMI had them do it?
Oh, I think the Beatles came up with the idea, and the record company's like, yes, we're going to do this. And was on board 100%.
Well, I definitely think they had some hand in it because, like I say, I mean, whether they did it to make more money or to just create further interest, I mean, because they were the biggest band in the world, I definitely think they put some of this in there. And then, because they knew everybody else would do the rest. It's like, we'll drop a couple of crumbs here and there, and then the world will fill in the rest.
Well, because if you think about this, okay, just think if this guy who wrote this song back in the day,
today's episode,
Terry Knight, so he met with Paul, right, back in the day?
Yes.
So what happened was they used Terry Knight as the I wanted to say Seattle, Washington, but the U.S. bug to plant the seed in the United States. Go back to the U.S., go start the rumor, go make this song. Because why would the record company give full clearance and give all rights cleared so that this record could go? He makes the record, says, oh, hey, I got this record. I'm going to go forward with this. This is my take on this. I think he met with Paul. Paul's like, yeah, we're not going to use you, but here's what we're going to do. We're going to pay you. You're going to make this record. You're going to release it prior to us giving full consent. And then you're going to ask for permission from the record label. We're going to bless it. And we're going to move forward with this to sell records. Because this was prior to that record was released prior to his alleged passing away.
Yeah. And I had never heard that record until you sent me the YouTube clip in which the guy's talking about the record. I also didn't know that this guy even existed. I listened to the record. It was kind of interesting.
Very cheesy. Cheesy.
It's very cheesy. And the host of that particular show, and he did a good job, and I apologize, I just can't remember what the name of the show was. But anyway, he was saying that, there was a lot of people who believe that Paul is dead, and this is a thing that they point to as being their smoking gun. Well, I'm sorry, that's not really that strong. It's interesting. It's interesting that this guy made this record, but it doesn't prove anything to me. And the guy, according to this host of that show, was that guy went on to produce records by Grand Funk Railroad, another band from the early 70s I really like. But by the time this guy died, he never said, hey, Paul's dead. And I guess that's another thing I come to, Mario. It's like, this isn't national security that we're talking about. This is a very, very famous musician. So by now, all of the people that were involved in Paul McCartney's life, the women that he had married, other band members, because John Lennon did get assassinated. On December 8th of 1980, and he was assassinated on the street. So I'm just saying, after all of that, there would have been plenty of time for people to come forward and say, all right, so here's the deal. Here's what happened. But that never happened. And I don't know. It's fun to think about and it's fun to explore, but I just don't think that Paul was replaced by anybody.
I buried Paul. No, it's but to me, if you that, I mean, when you look at the tragedy that did happen with the Beatles, with Lennon, being assassinated, it's interesting to me that there were people that were hearing different things back in those days. If it was hidden messages, I mean, I guess it's to this day, it still happens, but I mean, we're not talking about, I mean, how is that one of the greatest bands of all time hanging out in Central Park and is assassinated by some deranged fan, which is tragic to me. Just
absolutely tragic. And there's a whole story with that as well that, people still talk about to this day, but I just bring it up just because the whole point of this theory about Paul being dead was that they had been told by MI6 or somebody or the record labels, hey, now that Paul's dead, you guys are going to have to find a replacement because the society can't handle it. Kind of like, telling us about aliens or something. Well, society handled John Lennon being assassinated. It broke all of our hearts and we all still think about it, but life went on and we remember him and we remember the senselessness of that act, but they didn't, I mean, John wasn't in the band anymore, but you know what I'm saying.
Because if you look at it, I mean, I don't want to say apples to apples, oranges to oranges, but the band is no longer together. We're talking 10 years after the band has been, disbanded. I mean, the bands broke apart. Although what was interesting, because I did listen to the interview of what Paul said, was he was glad that he was able to reconcile with John and that they had conversations that were very much in a good place. I can't even imagine what the life of Paul McCartney would have been if they had not reconciled that relationship. I mean, you're talking about two guys that really grew up together until 67, or, until, Paul passed away in the tragic car accident. I'm kidding. But you got to throw some humor in there. But to have these two gentlemen build this successful band, and then, 10 years later, get gunned down by, and you're right. I mean, you do think about that. You're like, okay, but I mean, it's an angle. Where the record company back then, let's just say Paul did pass away. Okay, you and I are having the conversation.
Yep.
So if it did happen, the record company's like, dude, we got so much money invested that we need a look-alike. We need a Paul look-alike. We're going to go out. Here's what we're going to do. And to do that within like less than 24 hours, you know what I mean? To have a full, like, I know people are watching or listening. You can't fathom that type of thing. So at the end, I mean, to be the top 4 in conspiracies of all time.
Yeah. I don't know about that.
I mean, the moon landing before is after that one. Secret Society, control of the world. That's
my wife had never even heard that today when I told her we were doing this show, and my wife is a music geek like us. That's how I met my wife. And she knows how much I love the Beatles. My daughter loves George Harrison. It's funny because my daughter's 20, but like George Harrison's her favorite. But anyway, my wife's like, I've never heard this. What are you talking about? And she immediately said, oh yeah. And so Linda Eastman married a stand-in. I was like, that's a good point. I mean, who's going to do that? Why? You can't pay off Linda Eastman. I mean, her family was rich. They owned Kodak. I mean, what would be in it for her?
Maybe she didn't know. I mean, I guess
a woman's going to know.
Yeah. Well,
woman's going to know.
Family show. Well, we're at night. So, but real quick, before we wrap things up here from the West Coast of the best coast, JFK assassination, number 1, 9/11 cover up, Area 51 and aliens, then Paul McCartney. Now, if you take and just say the 20th century, that moves Paul up to number 3. Crazy.
Yeah, I would have to think about that and write some down. I mean, yes, it was a huge thing at the time amongst some people, but even today, there's some people that don't even know that this ever was a thing.
But what's crazy is that there's a whole group of individuals
If I may throw one thing in, Mario, because I don't want to
Yes.
forget this, because I want to give credit due. So I once interviewed Dave McGowan. Dave McGowan wrote a whole bunch of really good books on various topics. And one of the books that he wrote was called Inside the Canyon. I believe that was Inside the Canyon. Anyway, it was about Laurel Canyon here in Los Angeles and how many of the people who would become famous rock stars, including Jim Morrison of The Doors, all had family members who were in the military, many of them related to intelligence departments. And it's a very interesting book. And I don't necessarily believe all of it, but I think there's some truth in there. But anyway, the reason I bring this up is because people love Dave. Dave passed away like about 8 months after I interviewed him, and he was talking about this book. But even he's like, no, man, the Paul is dead thing. I get in arguments with people all the time. He goes, no, I absolutely do not believe that. And I think it's just just an urban myth. But I want to put it in there because Dave's work's very good. And any people who might be hearing this, they might think, well, wait, why didn't they talk about Dave McGowan? Because he talked about a lot of the rock and roll conspiracy stuff, but he did not believe Paul is dead.
He did not. Well,
No.
So let's go over this real quick. I know we talked about this list, the top 10 of all time, according to Times Magazine. It was JFK assassination number 1, 9/11 cover up, Area 51 and aliens would be number 3. Paul's number 4, holding up number 5, the secret society and the control of the world. That's a good one. We have the moon landing. I thought would have been a lot higher than Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene. Really put bringing up the caboose here. I thought that one would be a little higher as well. The Holocaust.
Yep.
Wow, really? Okay. The CIA and AIDS.
Yes.
Well, that's in the book Pale Horse. Behold the Pale Horse.
Yep.
And that's still to this day getting so much coverage. I mean, it's huge. If you haven't listened to that podcast, go listen to that. That's definitely a good one with Mark Jacobson. We talk about William Cooper, and then the reptilian elite. Does that include? I don't want to point out anybody, but interesting. I've not heard about the reptilian elite other than
Well, David Icke was the one who kind of gets blamed for that a lot because he did make some books about that idea. But yeah, all of these. There was one I was thinking about. There was one that we left out in here, and it just, of course, because I'm getting old, I forget what it was because there was one very famous one. Anyway, well, next time, I guess.
When we talk about conspiracies, I think of the 9/11, JFK.
Yep.
DB Cooper, another one that I think about.
That's a good one.
Which is making headline news this weekend.
What?
Yeah, I guess. The anniversary is coming up, and they said they alleged that they found titanium in the tie that this other guy had, and it matched up. So I had to call my guy, Lars Larson. He's like, it's BS. He sent 2 letters, BS. I was like, well, done deal. I was like, well, we're not going down that rabbit hole. I mean, he's covered it. Given, I can't believe Netflix did a whole docu-series on the thing. I mean, it's lengthy. And
you're
like,
talking about DB Cooper still?
Yeah. I watched on Netflix, and I'm like, God, this is long. I've never seen it.
Mario, let me throw something else in because I don't want to forget this, and I can't, because this is radio. I can't say too much, but a lot of people go, oh, I remember that. So, and this is just to demonstrate the way when you plant the seed of an idea, then it just like blows up. When I was a kid in junior high, and I'm going to give away my age here, there were 2 stories that went around that nobody, like, I don't know where this came from, but all of a sudden everybody believed it and everybody would laugh. One was about Rod Stewart, and one was about American Gigolo, the actor. I'm forgetting his name. He's a big yoga kind of.
Richard Simmons? Not Richard Simmons.
No, Richard. But anyway, you know what I'm talking. My point is, in the 70s, both of these, which I can't repeat on the air, had stories that were put out there on them. Everybody just believed it. And it was one of those things where at sometimes ideas just can blow up there was no internet. Nobody was like posting this on chat boards, but somehow every kid in school heard the story about,
these two individuals
and whatever thing that they have been involved with. I just bring it up because it's weird how the mind and viral ideas can happen even when there's no medium that would seem to sustain them.
Interesting. Do you want to share it on the exclusive?
I guess.
Go ahead.
But anyway, I bring that up, and I'm super embarrassed that I can't think of this guy's this actor because he's a great actor. But he's probably sick of hearing about it anyway. And in both cases, I don't think either one of those were true. But
Right.
it's just a weird human phenomena how all of a sudden a rumor could happen about you, and then
Well,
it just
how about
explodes.
here's the other one that kind of pertains to this one, and then this one will show my age, about Aaliyah being sacrificed to the Illuminati. Have you heard that one?
No, but it doesn't surprise me.
Beautiful woman.
Yes.
I mean,
She was gorgeous.
just and great, just a good R&B up and coming in the 90s R&B.
Yeah.
Late 90s, early 2000s. Well, that's not true because she was a teenager when she was singing in the early 90s, and then in the early 2000s when she did Rock the Boat. Oh man. I mean, I mean,
gorgeous.
Just amazing vocalist. I just thought she seemed like she had it really together as an artist. I was like, wow, she's really good. And I mean, I do love, I mean, for days. I mean, I will tell you this right now, man, I would make mixtapes back in the day for my future girlfriends. You know what I mean? I was like,
manifesting.
You know what I mean? I'm like, I got all the good songs on. I had the ultimate.
I'm just waiting for the right opportunity to pop this bad boy in, and then
right, or just to send it to them. Yep. You know what I mean? Like I would record this thing and want to share it. I mean, the hours, just like Beatles fans, hours that were taken so that I could listen to the radio station.
Oh yeah,
record the song and have the stupid DJ stop talking so that I could get the whole entire song. Now fast forward, I was that stupid DJ yapping my flapper just to get 20 seconds on the radio.
It's like I need a good clean cue here at the beginning and at the end. So like if you're talking over my intro and my outro, you're killing it here for me. Please don't do that.
Right. So yeah, but again, just like you were saying, that one did definitely take off where they thought she was a sacrifice for the Illuminati, which is unfortunate. She died in a plane crash coming back due to the plane being the NTSB cited that it was overload of the aircraft. So there is no Illuminati play into that. But again, just as you said, this is how these things take off. And look, when you're as successful as the Beatles, or Leah, or anyone who is successful, these kinds of things will happen. Now,
you and I were talking about Kurt Cobain just a few weeks ago, and it's like when people are of this magnitude and they've captured the imagination of the entire world, and then they are taken from us, or they die, people are trying to make sense of it in some way.
And for that one, especially, people are like, well, how do you blow your brains out or shoot yourself? I mean, this is definitely part of the extended version of the show, but if you're listening, how does someone, because everyone's like, oh, he put his toe in the hammer to fire that's not how that went down.
No, that
is not how that went down. I don't need to explain it. It's just a very unfortunate situation. Now, if Courtney Love had him offed, I mean, that's terrible. It's terrible. I mean, hey, it's an alleged story that's out there, and I will say, pound for pound, that if that should be on the conspiracy list. If someone's like, oh,
for sure,
just like OJ and that whole situation, how you not find the killer yet? How you not find?
They're still looking for him. He's out there somewhere.
You don't think that you don't think that if you can get the Green River Killer out of Washington from DNA evidence, you don't think they have enough evidence that was left? Oh, was contaminated.
You know what? Sometime you and I will have, because I know we got to end this thing, but someday we'll do the OJ case, because I remember living here in LA. I remember it all going down, and I do, because I never thought for a second that he didn't kill her. But then I would find out from people that I knew who were very smart. Oh, no, you should look at this, and you should look at this, and you should look at this. I never spent too much time on it, but sometimes just for curiosity's sake, maybe we'll take a look at that.
Oh, that might be that would be a fun one to do.
Aren't we morbid?
Well, that's just content we're really looking for. Unfortunately, at the expense of people who are no longer with us, and a lot of tragedy. Cobain, OJ's ex-wife, Nicole, and the young man who was, the pool boy. I can't even remember the pool boy's name.
Yeah, you mean the blonde guy? No. He was the waiter. He was a waiter at that restaurant.
That's right.
Goldman was his last name, I'm pretty sure.
That's right, Goldman. Yeah. Ron.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
I think that's his name.
Yeah.
We should probably let this go.
That could go forever. But as we wrap things up from the Pacific Northwest, you're gonna say you're the stand-in Paul McCartney. Is that what I'm hearing now? Michael, you're the stand-in Paul McCartney.
What do you mean?
I mean, you're the double. You're the double.
I can't imagine someone living their life like that, because at some point, if you this is the last thing I'll say about it, just to play devil's advocate, let's say that there was a double placed in there. How do you continue to live your life like that? And would you really drag it out this long? I think at some point you would just kind of like try to go off into the woodwork and let the work stand. And in the meantime, your other Beatles, well, it's at this point it's just Ringo Starr, but the women that were in your life, the families, somebody would have said something now, because that's just such a betrayal. And it's not a national security thing where people are going to come get you because you gave away national secrets. This is just a societal personality, cultural thing.
Can you imagine? Hey, my name is Paul McCartney. I'm now divorced, and I'm no longer with Linda. We broke up, and then all these other just for a comic piece. Hey, I'm Paul McCartney. By the way, you want to date me? And oh my God, I love you. You're Paul McCartney the entire time. If this is so true, we've all been duped, and the world's flat. There's going to be I'm going on places that I probably shouldn't even be going right now. But conspiracies in general, this would be the biggest one, as you said, political or anything of the nature where it's just, hey, look, hey, you know what? If Paul McCartney's like, hey, wouldn't that be interesting if he just comes out and say, hey, by the way, I'm the double?
Yeah. Well, look, Elvis Presley, for a long time, people said, Elvis, faked his death. Jim Morrison, they kind of said the same thing. Jim Morrison faked his death. But, look, I unfortunately, all of those excellent artists,
they're gone.
They're gone.
It's unfortunate. Yeah. As we wrap things up from the Pacific Northwest, be sure to check out your show and podcast, which is available on your website or on the TNT radio network. And be sure to tune in weekdays. You can find him on Twitter at Michael Parker LA. Again, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show.
I always have fun here, Mario. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll talk to you soon as we wrap things up here from the Pacific Northwest. I'd like to thank Mark Christopher, Michael Parker, Jeff Jen, Sophia Magana, and myself, Mario Magana. Be sure to look up at the sky, because you never know what you might see. Good night.